Hi everyone, welcome to International Social Work. In this module, we're going to learn all about international social work, the definition, what it involves, and what exactly it means to do international work. International social work is defined as international professional practice and the capacity for international action by the social work profession and its members. There are basically four key dimensions of international social work. One is that it's internationally related domestic practice and advocacy. And those are things like addressing drug sales, human trafficking, drug trafficking. These are problems that go across national boundaries. It could be international adoptions. And this also involves working with international populations. Another key dimension is professional exchange. This could be from taking a class like this where we're sharing information across borders. It could be going to another international conference, going to another country for training, to school, for any kind of education, bringing somebody in to train at an agency, whatever. So it's this international exchange, this professional exchange of information. And actually the internet has now made this so much easier. I love to go to YouTube videos and see what people are doing in other countries. There's always training, information. And so the internet has sort of made this key dimension of international practice much easier than it's ever been before. International practice, where you're actually doing something in an agency, and international policy development and advocacy. And that can be done on the international level. It can be local national policies that have an implication for either international people within your own country or in other places. The International Federation has a very long and complicated definition of international social work and actually what it does. I'm not going to read this to you, but I do want you to take time to read this long definition. So what is the opinion of this definition of global social work? The International Federation of Social Work in 2000 stated that the social work profession promotes social change, problem solving in human relationships, and the empowerment and liberation of people to enhance well-being. Utilizes theories of human behavior and social systems. Social work intervenes at the points where people interact with their environments. Principles of human rights and social justice are fundamental to social work. And so these are really our basic principles of social work. And if we look at what are the major kind of global social work problems, we see things like poverty, conflict with war, forced migration, the AIDS epidemic and other health issues, hunger, the plight of children, plight of women, environmental issues, on and on and on. And we could really go on and on about the major global social work problems. And they come, in and out of kind of the attention of the international community and the international media. But all of these at one time or another have been issues that, kind of stay at the forefront of what we're doing and where as social workers we need to intervene. And there's never a shortage of global social work problems for social workers involved with. When we look at kind of what are the major ideologies that are influencing and dominate our world, we see a mixture of all of these kind of ideologies. And in this class, we're not here. My job is not going to be to advocate for one of these or try to convince people that one's better than the other. They're all different. They all have something to add to our understanding of the world. And it's not really whether we believe in one or the other or this is our philosophy. What is important is that we understand the different ideologies and what they mean for people's lives and the work that we do. And so if we only see the world through one lens and that's all we know, then we don't understand how people from another lens see and understand the world. So even if we don't necessarily prescribe to that ideology or it's not something the ideology that we want to believe in, that's okay. But that's not okay to not understand and be able to see the world through the lens of another ideology. And so within this course, part of what I want to do is to open up your eyes to see the world through different ideologies and explore what these ideology brings to the understanding of our world. If we look at international social work, we'll see that there are all of these interrelated perspectives. We have the global perspective, the human rights perspective, the social development perspective, and the ecological perspective. And all of these perspectives work together to create international social work. And we don't work in isolation from any one of these perspectives. We actually work within this interrelated perspective. Some may be more heavily dominated at different times, but within this, we have this integrative perspective approach towards international social work. When we look at human rights, and human rights is one of the main things that we're going to be talking about in this country. And as simple as the definition may be, that human rights are the rights that all people have by virtue of being human. And that sounds so simple, but in some ways it's so complex. Human rights are derived from the inherent dignity of the human person and are defined internationally, nationally, and locally by various lawmaking bodies. And this is where we begin to have problems. Because as these dignities get defined internationally, nationally, and locally by various lawmaking bodies, obviously these lawmaking bodies are not always going to agree. So therefore, we have what some people call human rights violations and other people don't. So we're looking at, we kind of have an understanding of what human rights are, and that's kind of simple in its definition. But then when we get to the actual, is this a violation of a human right, that may vary according to local, national, and international. Common myths about human rights. That human rights are the same as civil rights. They're not. Human rights violations occur only in poor foreign countries. That's not true. Human rights violations generally occur in almost every country. I know it occurs in our country. Human rights are only concerned with violations. Human rights are not just concerned with violations. Human rights are concerned with people's basic rights to become, to develop and succeed. Only adults and lawyers can understand the significance of human rights. Human rights are only legal rights. These are all common myths we have. Human rights are the right that someone has simply because he or she is a human being. They are inalienable and universal. They are interconnectable. They're indivisible, and both rights and responsibilities. And so this is what we're talking about with human rights. And throughout, the discussion boards, the modules, everything, we will discuss and debate rights. What were the precursors to the 20th century human rights documents? These are relatively, our 20th century human rights document is a quite recent development. However, it did not come out of the just on its own. It's been developed for years, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years. When we look at first, coming from as early as 1715 BCE, we see that there was some documentation of human rights. And then we see a lot of it coming from various influences of different religions. And then we see the Magna Carta in England, the Aztecs, and a lot of the different countries that have had input in human rights documentation. And then we look at also different things kind of on an international level, such as in the early Genoa conventions and the International Red Cross and the things that they did. And then we look at the United Nations Charter that happened in 1945. And then we look at a lot of Gandhi's influence in leading India to independence in 1940. All of these things have really impacted our current documentations that you'll be reading about the current human rights. And if we look at kind of the 5 primary categories of human rights, we see civil rights, we see political rights, we see economic rights, social rights, and cultural rights. And these are all rights that belong under the domain of human rights. And if we look at in 1964, Malcolm X made in one of his famous speeches, he said, "When you expand the civil rights struggle to the level of human rights, You can take the case of the black man in this country before the nations of the United Nations. You can take it before the General Assembly. You can take Uncle Sam before the World Court. But the only level you can do it on is on the level of human rights. Human rights are something that you were born with. Human rights are your God-given rights. Human rights are the rights recognized by all the nations of this earth. When we look at a holistic framework, we looked at human rights underneath the domain of a legal, collective, and individual framework. And so we're looking at how all of these impact in this framework. When we look at the International Bill of Human Rights, we look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that happened in 1948. And this was kind of the first internationally written Declaration of Human Rights. And we see it had, breaks down into the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, both of which were adopted in '66 and really entered into force about 10 years later. When we look at the human rights, we kind of get some terms that may be confusing, and so I just wanted to point these out. The first is declaration, and declaration is a document stating agreed upon standard of principles. However, it's not legally binding. It's simply a declaration. There's no legal consequences for not following it. A covenant, convention, or a treaty is a legally bind agreement between two states. Two or more, could be more states, but between different nations or states. Ratification is a formal process by which the legislative body of a state confirms a government's action in signing a treaty. And then reservation, another term, is the exception that state parties make to a treaty. For example, if they say, we'll accept this, but not this. So it's the reservation have within that. What is human rights education? Well, in the UN's resolution declaring the decade for human rights, it states that human rights education should involve more than the provision of education and should constitute a comprehensive lifelong process by which people at all levels in development and in all strata of society learn respect for the dignity of others and the means and methods of assuring that respect and education is about human rights, provides people with information about human rights. Education for human rights helps people feel the importance of human rights, internalize human rights values, and integrate them into the way. And education for human rights also gives people a sense of responsibility for respecting and defending human rights and empowers them through learning skills to take appropriate action. When we look at human rights education, we see that it produces change in values and attitudes. It produces changes in behaviors. It produces empowerment for social justice. It develops attitudes of solidarity across issues and nations. It develops knowledge and analytical skills. And it produces participatory education. If we look at in the Human Rights Survey of 1997, we see that only 8% of adults and 4% of young people were aware of and could name the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. A large majority, almost 83%, which is very high, felt that the United States should do more to live up to the principles of this document. And then 2/3 of the people polled, nearly 63%, said that the poor are usually discriminated against in our society. Americans also felt that the following were routinely discriminated against: the disabled, the elderly, gays and lesbian, Native American, and African American. So if we look at where do human rights begin, I love this quote from Eleanor Roosevelt in 1958. Human rights begin in small places, close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the factory, farm, or office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. And I wanted to end with that because when we think about what we do as social workers and where we intervene on an individual level, a local level, a national level, and an international level. And all of those places have to do with human rights. And as international social workers, sometimes we think we only can do the big things. But international social work doesn't just involve the big things. It involves the little things too. It involves anything that's making a difference in people's lives. And as international social work, what we hope that we're doing um, is we hope we're intervening in ways that trickle down and trickle across, and that we see the impact. It's really, as an international social worker, I like to think, of myself as an international social worker. And it's not that I'm always working on the international level or working in an international agency. It's that, with every person that I intervene with, I'm also thinking of that on the different levels and where this comes from and looking at it from a global perspective. So sometimes being an international social worker is a state of mind. Sometimes being an international social worker means we're actually working on that level and doing really exciting things or going to other countries and working. Sometimes it's doing work at home from a mindset of an international social worker. And so so I don't want you to think just because you're not going to get a job or be able to work in some, international agency that you can't do international social work, because you can. You can do it with every client you see, every community, every nation. It's about looking at it from that lens. Anyway, thank you very much.